Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We're just going to give a few folks a few minutes just to join, and then we'll go ahead and get started. But thanks for coming. Hi, everyone. Just one more minute, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Greer. I'm a Senior Product Marketing Manager here at HashiCorp, and I'm proud to present to you Terraform 1.0. This is a webinar that just goes over engineering, what we've done in engineering. You also see a demo. I'll be joined by Kristin Laemmert, who's a software engineer here at HashiCorp. She works on Terraform Core, as well as my associate Kyle Ruddy, who's the technical product marketing manager for Terraform. Before we get started, I've been reminded, it's just a gentle suggestion, if anyone is having trouble with audio during the presentation or the demo, the volume may be automatically muted in your media player. So you can increase the volume by toggling the icon at the bottom left-hand corner of the media player. So with that little technical with that little suggestion, I'm going to go ahead and get started, and I'm going to pass things off to Kyle.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Michelle. All right, so we've got a bunch of stuff to go over. This is a huge announcement. This is definitely one of those things that HashiCorp has been working towards, building towards, trying to get to for the last while. And we're going to kind of start off by going through the history on how all of this kind of worked out, how this came to be, and really why this is such a tremendous landmark deal for us in the history of HashiCorp as a company. So let's dive right in. So first and foremost, I do kind of want to start off with a little bit about the history on Terraform itself. So, you know, when we think back to the time period of like Terraform, you know, just starting to be created and being built out, a three-part vision for how we were going to make use of Terraform and how those folks in the community are going to consume it as well. And first and foremost, it was about automation, you know, taking and being able to define and declare whatever resources you wanted to manage and provision across whatever service you wanted to consume it in. Then we got into the workflow side. This was also a heavy focus where, trying to figure out the best path forward for not only creating that declarative code base, how you can work together amongst different teams and community members, and how that code can be reused across several different platforms and shared widely. Now, this also brought into some of those considerations around security and compliance and things of that nature, as well as just management fundamentals for that. Then lastly, we get into the ecosystem side. If we want to deploy our infrastructure anywhere on any service, we really need to integrate with the ecosystem and the partners and pretty much anything with an API in an extraordinary fashion. So let's take a timeline view of kind of like how we got to this point with Terraform. So really, it's even though the slide says 7 years, it's really kind of a 10-year thing. This is a decade in the making, really. The initial idea, this concept, this light bulb moment came to Mitchell, one of the co-founders of HashiCorp, in 2011. And this was really kind of focused around one of the releases of a declarative way to manage and provision infrastructure, but it was limited to one particular cloud service. And so, this was a great step forward, but what about the rest of those cloud services? How can we pivot and maintain that same kind of usage across the board? So fast forward here a couple years into 2014, this is when we see that first version of Terraform being released. This was Terraform 0.1. And this was really kind of just a conceptual release, a proof of concept, if you will. And it was released with provider support for AWS and DigitalOcean. Then if we fast forward a little bit, the adoption really hadn't taken off, quite as well as one might have expected. So it was, a couple years in the making to get to the point where really there was a lot of pickup in terms of community involvement, provider builds. If we think back to some of the releases, 0.2 was released and it had, I believe, 5 or 6 different providers. Then we got into 0.7. The big milestone for that one was having 500 contributors as part of that. And then we get into 2017, and this is where the provider ecosystem really starts to grow. The contributors are continuing to escalate and grow as well. So we're seeing providers for Azure, for Google Cloud, for Docker, OpenStack, for all of these different players in the ecosystem at that point in time. And then we get on to our next step here with the, as part of, I believe this was 0.10. We're starting to hit, fabulous milestones. This was where we hit the 1,000 contributor mark, which was really mind blowing. If you think about it through the kind of path that Terraform took to get even to that point on the timeline. But this was also where the ecosystem really started to grow. There's a tremendous focus on the way that providers were created, managed, and even the way that Terraform really interacted with those providers. Provider program was launched itself. And this allowed not only partners of HashiCorp, but also community members to really start creating providers and releasing them into the community for everyone to consume and enjoy. This was also kind of a landmark deal for us in terms of a major cloud partnership with Microsoft and Azure. This was really the first major partnership that HashiCorp had with Terraform, so tremendous deal there. And then we get into the Terraform registry. Though it might not be exactly what you see out there today, this one was mainly focused around modules. Allowing those, more advanced users to be able to, create their configuration files and share them openly, and allow for those maybe newer users to be easily able to, search through the registry and start defining and declaring their resources in a pretty easy fashion, just really driving adoption forward there. Then we get to the next step here. And this is when this probably around 2019, when Terraform 0.12 was released. This was the first version of HCL2, and this was a a giant leap there as well. Main focus around stability, programmability, as well as usability when it comes to using Terraform in that underlying HCL code. Now, this was also part of the period where we saw some inclusion with the commercial offerings of Terraform Enterprise and Terraform Cloud. And really, this was just to support those organization-focused workflows in that more commercial offering. And then afterwards, seeing the Terraform registry as we know it today. This is where we added, we embraced providers and included that into the registry so that not only is it modules, but it's also providers that can be shared and used and consumed in various different ways. So then building on that Terraform vision that we started with there, on the automation front, we've maintained some tremendous figures there. Over 100 million downloads of the open source binary from the releases.HashiCorp site. We're seeing over 100,000 monthly folks that are going out and using the HashiCorp Learn guides to kind of, embrace and kind of learn how to use the different products in ways that they were meant to be used. And then the last one here is a fantastic number for me. The 10,000 Terraform associates that are out there. I remember back to HashiCorp or HashiConf 2019, receiving one of the beta exam vouchers and really being excited about that. So it's really wild to think how far this has gone from just a beta program into 10,000 different people being certified. Tremendous. Then jumping into the workflow side, on the Terraform Cloud side, we've seen a lot of growth there as well. We have over 120,000 different Terraform Cloud users. We're seeing 5,000 new users signing up for Terraform Cloud every month with about 30,000 runs per day. The adoption figures are off the charts. And then, of course, we wouldn't be here without our ecosystem, without our partners, without the community members that have really embraced Terraform over the years. And our ecosystem has grown as well. The Terraform registry now features more than 6,000 modules that grew even just to hit this next landmark milestone, even just since HashiConf EU last week. We have more than 1,000 different providers. I believe we just hit the 1,100 mark this week. We have more than 100 different technology partners that are out there within the ecosystem itself. All right, so let's dive into what exactly we're here to talk about, and that's Terraform 1.0. Of course, this is already available for release, download today, but let's talk about what's included in it. So part of the the concept of 1.0 releases within HashiCorp is a big deal. Like, this isn't something that we take lightly. And Kristin's going to talk about that here in a little bit. But as far as the points that I want to cover real quickly, Terraform 1.0 has gone out and it has embraced scale. If you think about it, when you see folks in the community who are talking about this on the different forums, on the different areas and social media platforms, we're seeing that Terraform has been embraced by anything from global 2000s to startups to even, single practitioners like myself who use it just to stand up and update my blog on a regular basis. So seeing the adoption from DevOps practitioners, just being able to choose Terraform as their, product of choice to provision and manage their infrastructure really speaks volumes about Terraform. Then we get into the stability side, and really this is where Terraform 1.0 really focuses on, because we want to make sure that everybody who's using Terraform has the stability for their workflows, so that whatever workload that they choose to provision using Terraform, it's going to continue to work and in a stable manner. And lastly, usability. Just making sure that, regardless of where it's being used, which other services that are out there are being consumed, it's always in a consistent manner in the way that Terraform operates. So it doesn't matter if it's on premises, if it's in the cloud, if it's multi-cloud or hybrid cloud, or just a mix of everything in between there, even to the point of ordering a Domino's pizza with a Terraform provider. We want it all to be used in the same consistent fashion just to increase the ability for anybody to be able to get up to speed with a Terraform provider as it is. All right, so let's talk about some of the core features here when it comes to what Terraform 1.0 brings to the table. First and foremost, interoperability. And this really comes down to state compatibility, making sure that Terraform is cross-compatible both forwards and backwards between various versions of 0.14, 0.15, and now 1.0. This is also embraced by the remote state data sources, meaning that you can take your various Terraform configurations as they exist today and be able to still reference prior versions of Terraform as they may have been configured as you upgrade your current Terraform configurations without losing any type of functionality or feature set within that. So there's no worries there. And the huge process there is around the maintenance around the upgrade process. And we're really making a huge statement here, saying that the 1.x product lifecycle, we're going to make sure that all of your existing functional workflows will continue to work throughout the entire lifecycle without the requirement of having upgrade tools, code refactoring, or other changes. Now, of course, if we do add new features, that is something that's going to have to be considered. And of course, we're still going to be maintaining those upgrade guides that we highly suggest you check out. Lastly, workflow support. We're also stating publicly that we're going to maintain a maintenance period for the Terraform 1.0 lifecycle for up to 18 months, where we are going to continue to investigate bugs, continue to release features, and make sure that you have the confidence to continue using Terraform 1.0 for that time period with your workflows. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Kristin to talk a little bit more about the features and kind of what this means from the engineering side of the house. Kristin?
Thanks, Kyle. All right, so I'm here to talk about Terraform 1.0 from an engineering perspective, and I'm seeing some questions come in already that are mostly, what's new in Terraform 1.0? So why don't I go directly to talking about that? Now, am I doing this correctly, or are the slides still showing? I'll just keep going and someone will scream no if I'm not. Okay, so, what is new in Terraform 1.0, which I just got to talk about at HashiCorp. So if you've seen me talk before, sorry, this isn't gonna be new. But I'm really, really excited to talk about what's new. I've been at HashiCorp for 3 years, so I've been deeply part of the last several releases. And since I've been here, all we've talked about is 1.0 and what it'll take us to get to 1.0. So I'm really excited to show everybody what is new in Terraform 1.0, which is absolutely nothing. There's nothing new in Terraform 1.0 compared to Terraform 0.15, which may be a confusing shock to some people. Maybe it's an obvious expected thing to others. But I get a lot of questions of why. Why isn't there anything new in 1.0? And why am I here at a webinar talking about nothing? Because talking about nothing is maybe not fun for people to listen to. We talk a lot about how high HashiCorp standards are for 1.0. So if this is new to you, or if, like, a lot of people are just asking, why wasn't it 1.0 all along, right? Terraform has been used for years in production. So why wouldn't you have a 1.0 release sooner? And it's that we have these really high standards that we've been working towards. And we wanted to get Terraform to a sufficiently stable point so that we could say, here's Terraform 1.0. We're not going to make any breaking changes, and we're going to continue supporting 1.0 for at least the next 18 months. So really, Terraform 0.15 was our Terraform 1.0 alpha. And Terraform 1.0 itself is Terraform 0.15.5, I believe. There will be no more 0.15 releases because it is now all 1.0. So the reason for this long delay in getting 1.0 released is that we had to be able to make a lot of promises about the stability. Kyle mentioned the interoperability between state file versions. We needed to be able to promise that the configuration language was stable, that we weren't going to make breaking changes to any of the workflows, also that our various protocols and wire formats were stable. And again, this all just breaks down to us saying we're not going to make breaking changes. And so we had to get a lot of the work kind of in place to get us there. to get there, we've had to spend the last several years making some very big changes in Terraform. We did a lot of big refactoring. We fixed a lot of bugs. You may have noticed over the last several releases, we've been removing some deprecated commands, so things that we'd maybe communicated, several releases previously that we were going to be removed. We finally got around to removing those and making some of those commitments. And we also introduced a number of features in the last several releases that were all specifically chosen as key features to get us ready for 1.0. So what I'm going to be doing now, instead of talking about what's new in 1.0, because again, absolutely nothing, just not a thing is new in 1.0, I'm going to be talking about some of the key features that we've introduced in between 0.13 and today, and kind of why those were chosen and emphasized as a 1.0 readiness feature. So one of the major projects we did was refactoring, and I'm calling this my secret refactoring because you wouldn't know that the core team has been doing all this work if you weren't actually watching GitHub. This is completely not user-facing work. This is boring for a lot of people who are only interested in hearing about features. But it was all work that we needed to do to get us ready. So there kind of constantly maybe some issues or feature requests that'll come in for Terraform. And it always seems like it's an easy, well, why don't you just fix this problem? And frequently it's not easy because we actually need to do some of this refactoring, change Terraform's architecture, figure out how something is going to fit in. So we did a lot of this behind the scenes work. We deleted a lot of unused code. So I've got to shout out to another Terraform engineer, adjacent Terraform engineer, for all the work they did, just helping us delete this unused code, figure out what wasn't used, what could be simplified. One of the projects I did in the last 6 months or so was this really big refactoring of one of our deep internal packages. And that just gave us some more flexibility to make the changes we needed. We also did a lot of just adding things like tests, making sure our test coverage was better than it was, also just helping us make it easier for us to write tests. So this was a lot of the kind of boring behind the scenes prep work we did to get to 1.0. Okay, so to dig into detail on some of those things, I talked about removing deprecated components. So again, this was over the last several releases, nothing new in 1.0, but we removed the built-in vendor provisioners. So that was file, local exec, and remote exec provisioners are still in Terraform. They're not going anywhere. We're going to continue supporting them. Now I'm going to pause for just a moment because it looks like somebody's saying they're still not seeing the updated slides. And I'm going to keep talking, but someone tell me if the slides are not moving forward for the audience. There's something missing from that. So, okay, I mentioned deprecating the removing built-in vendor provisioners. Okay, so part of Terraform's kind of 1.0 stability promise, some of those vendor provisioners, they weren't being maintained, so they just couldn't possibly live up to our standards for a 1.0 release if it was unmaintained provisioner. So we were finally able to remove those. And I want to reemphasize those file, local exec, remote exec provisioners aren't going anywhere. Third-party provisioner plugins are also going to continue to work for all of the 1.x cycle, so those aren't going anywhere. We've also made changes to some of the command line options. So you may be aware that a number of Terraform command would take an optional kind of directory argument that would tell Terraform to switch directories before running to the command. But that was really inconsistently implemented. So some things wouldn't work using that. So we've just replaced the whole thing with a new shadir flag that will tell Terraform to move directories. We also replaced a couple of functions, the list and map function. Those have been removed, but they were already replaced with more appropriate functions, which are toList and toMap, effectively doing the same thing, but we wanted a more accurate function name. There we go, and some tweaks to the ignore changes syntax. So all of the examples I'm bringing up on this slide aren't just to tell you what's been removed, but I want to highlight the fact that we were really focused on making sure we weren't removing something without a good reason and preferably without having a workaround or a better path forward. I think the hardest one for us to deal with this was removing those vendor provisioners. And our education team actually did a lot of work updating and writing a bunch of new tutorials and posts up on the Learn website that would kind of help explain our vision for how provisioners would work with Terraform and maybe better ways to provision your own infrastructure without doing it through Terraform or through those unmaintained provisioners. And everything else, as I said, we were really focused on removing things that had better paths forward and not just removing things for the fun of deleting code, although I do find deleting code very fun. And we have been introducing new features. So just because there's nothing in 1.0 doesn't mean there hasn't been anything in the last few years. I hope you've noticed. I drew them all especially for you. I'm covering a handful of random features that we've added in the last several releases. So this is in no way covering everything. I just want to focus on some of the bigger features that were put in place, maybe features that took a few releases for us to fully implement, or that I just think are particularly good examples of work we did specifically to work towards 1.0. So if you're not hearing a feature mentioned, it's not because I don't think it's important, it's just not one I chose for this section. The provider installer is one of the more obvious changes we had in Terraform 0.13, besides, of course, the module counting for each and depends on, which were wonderful. The provider installer changes are something that we spent making a bunch of changes. There's a new provider source, there's a provider lock file. I'm going to dig into some more details of the provider installer changes in a future slide. We added more explicit configuration for provider aliases. There was this kind of construct of passing around empty provider configuration blocks and modules that wasn't really clear to anyone, not just the users, kind of even the core developers. Every time we looked at it, it turned out things didn't quite work the way we saw we did. So we decided to make it something that was more explicit and easier to validate in the code. Kyle mentioned the state file compatibility, and that Terraform is now much smarter about being able to read from state files in different Terraform versions as long as it's a compatible state file version. I will skip those details. We added a lot of new handling of sensitive values. So both provider-defined sensitive attributes and giving module developers the ability to define variables as being sensitive. So I'll go a little deeper into some of these features. The provider installer was near and dear to me because this kind of was my project for all of 0.13. I spent a year and a half or so on this. So I have a lot of thoughts on the provider installation. So we started by adding this explicit provider source requirement if you're using a provider that is not one of the HashiCorp-owned providers in the public registry. This enabled us to let users automatically download, install community providers from the registry. So this is how we were able to kind of expand the registry to let anyone publish a provider and have Terraform automatically downloaded on NIT. As we added that, we basically entirely rebuilt the provider installer. So there's now many new provider installation configuration options you can do in the CLI config. So if you want to tell Terraform to get all your providers from a network mirror or a specific file system location, that's something that you can configure in the CLI config now. There's also the provider dependency lock file, which is something that we hope that people will choose to commit into their VCS, so you can ensure that your Terraform runs are using the exact same provider versions across any workstation you're using it on. And there's a handful of new commands that we've added to help support the provider source stuff in general. So there's a provider's lock command that will pre-generate that lock file, or the provider's mirror, which will download all of the providers you have for configuration if you wanted to then take those and put them in a specific file system location. I'm going to have a few really simple examples of provider source. Again, this was released in 0.13 and some of the installer stuff added over the 0.13 and 0.14 release. So in all likelihood, this isn't going to be new to anybody here. So I'll go through it a little quickly. But I'm showing here that new source attribute. In this example, I have two providers. I have random, which is the official HashiCorp random, and my random, which is a non-existent version of the random provider. Just in this example, say I forked random and re-implemented it. So I want to use both randoms in a single configuration. So this level of complexity isn't necessary. I don't expect to see many people with three providers all named random in one config, but that is now supported if you have multiple providers with the same name. And so here I'm just showing that I've got 2 resources up on a slide, 2 random pet resources. One of them is going to use the default random provider, but the second I've configured specifically to use my provider. So that's nothing new, but that is something that's got new power now that we've added that extended provider source capability. These are some snippets from the new provider installation CLI configuration options. So this shows a CLI config file that has both a file system mirror and network mirror set up. Again, these are just kind of here for examples, so I'm not going to give a full demo. If this is a feature you're interested in, though, now you know where to go look for it. This was, again, part of the 0.13 release, but you can go look at the provider installation options. And then the last provider installation option I want to show is this dev overrides. This is interesting to me because as a core developer, I spend a lot of time also working with a provider binary. And so with this new dev overrides, it's a tool we've given specifically for anyone who's working on developing a local provider and maybe just wants it to be easier to build their binary and continue to run Terraform without having to copy a file somewhere or run Terraform in it every time. Okay, so that's it for the provider installation related things. I'm also going to talk a bit about our sensitivity enhancements. This is something that we've started working on. There was some pre-existing concept of Terraform, but was something that we felt was really important to get not just in Terraform in time for 1.0, but have a few releases to see how users were using it and what other work we may need to do to support this for users. So Terraform, prior to 0.13, had the concept of a provider-defined sensitive attribute. So you may have a resource, and maybe one of its attributes is a password. And so the provider was already able to tell Terraform, this field is sensitive, so redact it from the UI output. In 0.14, we added user-defined sensitive variables. So now it's not just information we're getting from the provider or from a module output. You could also say, I've got a variable and I'm calling it var.password and it is sensitive. So if Terraform is going to print anything to the UI, redact this variable as well. And then what we added over time was enhanced tracking of those sensitive values. So it's not really enough just to say a variable is sensitive. If we use that variable and maybe a local to create a longer string, and that string lost track of the fact that it had a sensitive value embedded in it. So we've added this tracking for all expressions that were derived from any sensitive expression. So not just an input variable, but a provider variable, and that will track all the way through the system. So no matter where you're using it for Terraform, you know, even if it's in another module built up with other values, it's still a sensitive variable. And there's just a continuation of the tracking. So sorry, it's just over several releases, we extended that capability. And kind of like before, we added a few functions this time to help support sensitivity and let people have some finer grain control over what is and isn't considered sensitive by Terraform. And now I have some code examples for sensitivity. They are incredibly simplistic, so I realized from these examples that might actually be helpful information for how you might want to use sensitivity. I'm hoping mostly what it's going to do is kind of trigger some interest, and if this is a topic you are interested in, you know that's something you can go look into. So here I have a sensitive variable password, and then the corresponding sensitive output. And it's important here that you'll notice that in the output, I also have sensitive equals true, because Terraform will give you an error if you're trying to output a sensitive value without, I'm going to basically say, acknowledging that you know that it is sensitive. So when I use Terraform with this sensitive password, when I run, plan apply, you'll see that the password is going to be redacted, and the Terraform UI just shows that a sensitive value goes there. And I did mention the non-sensitive function. So if what I really wanted out of life was actually to have Terraform print my very secret password on the screen, I could tell it, yes, please, this is non-sensitive. Go ahead and display it on the UI. And now when I run Terraform apply, it will happily print out the value of that secret variable. Okay, that's what I had, just covering a couple of the cool features that we've built on in the last few releases that were features that we needed to get to 1.0. So there is my apology for not having anything actually new in 1.0 to talk about, and highlight of the features that I think helped us get there. All right, Kyle, I'll pass it back over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. All right, so now we're going to get into one of my favorite sections of every single webinar that I do, and that's demo time, where we kind of get to show you some of the advantages around upgrading to Terraform 1.0 and kind of how some of these features and functionalities work. So first and foremost, though, I kind of want to set the stage for what I'm going to be showing you, because I'm not going to be showing you direct, CLI-based, command line-driven features and functionality of the Terraform code. What I'm going to be doing is making use of Terraform Cloud, so I can show you several different things all working in the same period of time without having to go through the lengthy process of having to change or modify Terraform versions or do anything of that nature. So I'm going to be using the remote option or remote operations functionality of Terraform Cloud to really show you what we're able to do with these latest improvements. The other thing that we kind of need to know about Terraform Cloud when it comes to the demo that I'm about to run through is this new feature page that we've added here recently, which is known as the Workspace Overview page. And what this does is it allows us, basically anybody who has a Terraform Cloud account can now look into their workspace and have a direct line to all kinds of information that is helpful to know for their particular workspace. So even if you're not the administrator or owner of a workspace, you can click into it. You can know exactly what's going on, like what Terraform version it is, what happened on the latest run. You can even get some metrics about how what the performance are on some of the runs. So with that said, let me start sharing my screen here, and let's dive into our demo. Give me 1 second to reorganize some things so I don't show you my... There we go.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to jump in really quickly and say, if anyone is stuck on the slides, feel free to just refresh your tab, and that should get you to our current place and time. But also, we will be making a recording of this entire presentation and demo available, so you should expect that to see that in your email in a few days. Just wanted to put that out there. Back to you, Kyle.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so hopefully what you're looking at right now is probably going to be in what's known as the media player within our environment here. And what you should be seeing is a Terraform Cloud console, which is showing 4 different workspaces. So what we're doing here is we're first going to start off with a look about interoperability. I've been going through the questions. I've seen there's a lot of questions about how exactly this works, how the different versions can still interact with one another, and how they can still, kind of maintain that operational focus. So what I've done is I've taken one of our normal standard demo environments that just stands up a web application, a website. And kind of taken that apart. I've deconstructed it and turned it into, instead of 1 workspace with 1 configuration, into 4 workspaces, 4 configurations, all running their own unique version of Terraform. So let's start off by, this is going to be Azure-based. So we first need to start off with a resource group. So if we click on that workspace, we can see that this is using... if you can see the highlighted area and to the top right-hand side, it's using Terraform 0.15.2. And it's doing that to create a resource group, if the name of the workspace is appropriate. We can see that it's created 1 resource, but we kind of want to know what, we don't know exactly what that resource is. So if we actually click into the See Details there that's underneath the latest run, it'll bring up our run UI here. And we can expand out our Apply Finished section here, where we can see that we have created 1 resource group that we can see in a little bit different than the normal standard Terraform CLI output. It's Azure RM Resource Group. I've named it for within Terraform, Demo RG. And then based on our outputs below, you can see that the resource group is named Ruddy Hashi App Demo. So next we're going to move on to our next workspace, because if we need to stand up a web application, we're probably going to need some networking. So let's click on our network workspace next. Here we are using Terraform 0.13.6 to manage 7 different resources within our environment. Now, if you're familiar with Azure or even just networking of web applications itself, you might think that 7 resources might sound a little, extra. Might be a little too many things that are going on there. So one of the nice things about what Terraform Cloud can do is it can interact with the version control system on the back end, so we can actually see the README, which if we scroll down to the bottom, this is the README that exists out in our version control system. In this case, it's a GitHub repo. And as part of our README, we can see that the resources created are listed. So we know that we're creating a virtual network, a subnet, some security groups, which is probably where a lot of those resources come into play, as well as a public IP. Then if we scroll back up to the top, we have our outputs. In this case, our important one is our FQDN. So if we highlight that and go to that site, which is live right now for all of you who are watching this live, we have a Apache system that's just the default page. It's not been configured for anything yet. We're going to get to that. So next up, we need to actually deploy where that web application is going to live. For the sake of this demo, we've chosen a virtual machine. As part of this workspace, we are using Terraform 0.14. So for those of you that are paying attention, we've used 0.15, 0.13, and now 0.14 to work within our different create resources within our web application here. Down here, I've seen some other questions around sensitivity. In this case, Terraform Cloud obfuscates our sensitive value for our credentials using for our admin username and password, as well as an output for our Terraform version being used in our virtual machine name. Now, let's get to the point where we actually do some stuff with Terraform. And this is our web application. This is our workspace that's actually going to create some things on that web page that we saw just a second ago. So for this one, we're going all the way back to 0.12.30 in order to do a bunch of things to create and stand up that website. So we're going to go ahead and kick off a queue plan to let our remote execution mode work and do some things. However, I want to show you what's happening behind the scenes so that you know there's no magic. There's no, this is all Terraform just working together. So if we take a look at our variables tab, there's no, client ID, there's no subscription ID, there's no client secret, any of those things that are required to work with Azure. All we have is that Terraform variables information, which you're going to see come to life here in just a second. We can also use our workspace overview page to head out to our, over here onto the right-hand side, to our GitHub repository, where we can see our configuration that lives and exists out here. If we click on our main configuration file there, this is the important part here. We're going through and we're using the Terraform remote state data source to use Terraform 0.12 to reach forward to grab those outputs from the other workspaces. So here we have our resource group that we're going to source information from, our network, in our virtual machine. And then we're doing some magic to then configure our web page, which basically we're pulling in all those outputs and we're tossing them into an environmental variable that we are then passing to a very basic shell script to stand up our web page. So if we jump back to our web application workspace here, we can see that our last run has applied. It's been successful. If we go over here to our outputs and go to that link, there we go, refresh. I could not have paid money to have this happen. For our first web page update here, you see that we have referenced Terraform, and it says hello to all the attendees. And in this case, it's saying hello from Terraform 0.12, which is the page that grabbed all of that information, and it sourced some additional information from those other workspaces. So we can see that our resource group name here was sourced from 0.15.2. We can see that our FQDN was sourced from our workspace using 0.13.6, and then our virtual machine name was pulled from our workspace using 0.14.9. So we've kind of put all of those things together, all those different versions into a single configuration that's able to reach out and still use and make use of those versions of Terraform to create this page. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're like, but Kyle, you went through this entire process, but you didn't use Terraform 1.0. So let's move from our interoperability and let's take a look at the upgrade process, because that's something that's extremely exciting. So we're going to go ahead and close this out, and we're going to go back to our resource group. Now, one of the things that Kristin was talking about was, how 0.15 is basically 1.0 in disguise. So a lot of those improvements, a lot of those updates. So really, if you go out and take a look at the upgrade guide, we should be able to take this workspace, change our Terraform version that we can click on. It's an interactive link right there. Go down to our version right here, select 1.0, save our settings, and be able to run this workspace again and have that output. However, I want to take this a step further. I want to not just do that for this workspace, we're going to do that across all the workspaces. So we're going to use a little help from the TFE provider, and we're going to update all of those workspaces except for the 0.12 one, because that has some considerations and some other issues with moving directly from 0.12 to 1.0. So we're going to update the other workspaces to be using 1.0. So coming back to our resource group here, we can even see that our description has been updated to using 1.0. So now, through the magic of what's known as run triggers, which are in our, it's a Terraform Cloud feature, we're going to kick off our plan process, and run triggers are going to basically build a Terraform Cloud pipeline that goes from one workspace to the next, to the next, to the next, as it continues to build out, process, and update each of these workspaces. So our run is continuing to function there. As soon as that's complete, we should be able to go onwards to our network. Again, I want to say this is a live demo, so things might not be quite as speedy as I hoped, but that's the joy of live demos. So here's our networking workspace again. We can see that we have 2 run triggers off onto our workspace overview page. So it's sourcing information from that resource group workspace, performing things, and then going on to the virtual machine. Now, as part of this, it's also going to ask us for an update as to whether or not we want to confirm this process continues forward. We'll just add in a gentle note saying, please do go ahead. Notes and all of that information is always very helpful. While we're waiting on this to deploy, we do have a couple beta features that are running and visible right now in Terraform Cloud. The first is our new apply UI. That's where I showed you the resources earlier. It's going to be a little more prevalent on our virtual machine page here. And one thing that I do want to call out, a lot of what's happening here is actually due to, ordinarily a upgrade of this nature would just continue. It wouldn't need a full apply process to go ahead and run. But because of that Terraform version variable that I'm using and referencing, it does require a complete apply. And here in this one, we can see some information like cost estimation, what this virtual machine is going to run or cost us in this environment, as well as some of our Sentinel policy as code policy checks that are running there. And then our resources are going to generate, and then we'll be able to go on to our next area. So as that's running, I kind of mentioned it earlier that one of the important things is around the upgrade guides. Now we're still maintaining upgrade guides, So, this might be a little wild in this environment or, in your own environment, but definitely read those upgrade guides, make use of them, ensure what you're doing as you're moving throughout the different versions without, going ahead and skipping versions. All right, so our planning process is running on our web application. Yep, there's our confirmation that we need. So once that is complete, we will be able to go back out to our web page and see what's new. On the other part, beta process that's going on out here is a kind of a live look at the resources that are being made available. So that's another kind of area if you're clicking around in Terraform Cloud to check out. All right, so our configuration has applied. We're ready to go out back to our web application. So this time, what do we have? There we go. We have switched over to a different HashiCorp product. In this case, we are saying hello from Nomad. So we can see some updates here. We are still continuing to use 0.12 in order to source all of that information. We are now pulling the rest of that workspace information, such as the resource group name from 1.0, the FQDN, as well as the virtual machine name, all from 1.0. And we did all of that without having to change any code on the back end, without having to do anything except for just click the drop-down box, switch it to 1.0, or if you're using the open source binary, just upgrading that to 1.0 through your package manager of choice or whatever your installation base might be. So with that, we're going to jump back into our slides and dive into some Q&A. So let me stop the screen share.
Hi, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that demo and overview. If you notice, there's a Q&A section in the bottom. We do have a lot of attendees. We're going to try and get to as many questions as we possibly can. So with that, Daniel asks, Kyle, does Terraform Cloud support any kind of GitOps workflow to trigger Terraform plan apply from Git and CI/CD pipelines?
Yes, absolutely. So what we kind of saw in that last demo was a kind of a situation where, because that was a Terraform Cloud environment that was integrated with GitHub as the version control system, any type of commits, pull requests, anything of that nature would have triggered what's known as a speculative plan. However, if you're making use of the open source binary, there are also ways that you can embrace things like GitHub Actions to perform Terraform tasks, or anything along those lines in order to see a commit or pull request and run some sort of external process that uses and consumes Terraform. So yes, there are a lot of versions that are out there and can be used in that nature. Just depends on what application you're using and what you're most comfortable with.
Great. Okay. Well, Brian asks, Kristin, is there a prescribed upgrade path or method to handle the provider syntax change from 0.12 to new? He is running everything in Terraform Enterprise.
Yeah, so Terraform 0.13 included a 0.13 upgrade command, and what that'll do is load your current configuration and write the required providers block. So it'll write that provider source attribute for all providers in your configuration. So I recommend you run that and then do a plan and apply in Terraform 0.13, and then you should be good to go.
Great. Philip asked Kyle, when we say state compatibility between versions, is this older Terraform versions reading 1.0 state, 1.0 Terraform version reading old state, or both?
Yeah, so that was literally part of what the demo that we saw was, and basically what it comes down to is it's forward and backwards. If you're using older versions of Terraform in these 0.12, 0.13 area, you are going to have to use certain versions. Like for our demo, it was 0.12.30 and 0.13.6. So those versions are newer. We'll be able to, go forward and backwards, as well as anything in the 0.14, 0.15, and 1.x lifecycle will all be able to, intermingle.
Cool. All right. Well, Dwight asks Kristin, where exactly are the provider credentials stored, if not in the variables section? Is it at the org level or pulled from an external source dynamically?
So that's in the hand of the provider itself. The providers determine where credentials come from. So for example, if you're using like the major cloud providers, AWS and Google Cloud, they frequently have multiple options for storing your credentials. So that's entirely handled by the provider. And then if you're asking about any of that information that Terraform holds on to, it continues to be stored in state. That's not changed.
Great. Mohammed asks Kyle, what are the differences between Terraform test and Terraform refresh commands?
So these are, if I understand the question correctly, these are kind of two separate areas in the way that these work. So Terraform refresh is going to be all about taking the configuration as it's been deployed and is being managed, and it's going to refresh what the state file looks like, how that kind of is interpreted, what it understands the infrastructure to be versus what the state file is. When it comes to Terraform test, this is something that we've kind of been working on throughout the last couple versions, and was something that was featured at the HashiConf EU keynote. And Terraform test really comes down to work against modules. So this is around, deploying, building, writing, and even testing some of those external modules to ensure that they are doing exactly what you think they are or are supposed to be doing. So, they're kind of two separate topics that do their own, each independent thing.
Right on. Okay, Shahab asks of Kristin, is there any automated way of migrating from Terraform 0.12 to 1.0?
So we don't have an automated way to step through all of those upgrades. What you'd need to do, we have a Terraform, as I mentioned before, the 0.13 upgrade tool, which you can go use to get from 0.12 to 0.13. And then for all of our upgrades, we recommend that when you first upgrade your Terraform version, you run through a plan and apply to make sure there are no surprise changes. 0.13 to 0.14 doesn't need a special upgrade command. You can just do the upgrade similarly to 14 to 15 or 1.0. I believe there's going to be no problems going directly from 0.14 to 1.0, since, as I mentioned before, it really is 0.15.5. We've made no more changes. But part of me will always nervously say, please, please test this in your non-production workspace first. Yes, sorry. So that is the answer.
Cool. All right, great. So Philip asks a question to Kyle. About remote state compatibility. The docs mentioned that 0.12, 0.13, 0.14, etc., and 1.0 versions will be compatible. Does this include the latest GPG-related versions of each?
Yes, correct. So long story short, yes, absolutely. Even with the changes with the GPG code swap update there, it will continue working and being functional throughout.
Excellent. Okay, Mila asks this to Kristin. When is Terraform going to update Service Principal API to call Microsoft Graph instead of Azure Active Directory Graph?
Okay, that was one I pushed an answer to. So that sounds like it's a question for the provider developer. I wasn't entirely sure if that was a question about the Azure provider or an Azure-related backend, but in either case, those are managed by, I think, mostly our in-house Azure development team and not something handled in Terraform core itself.
Excellent. Okay, so this is a question to Kyle. Madupe, sorry, is new to Terraform, and what is the best way to learn Terraform for non-cloud infrastructure?
So one of the biggest things that I can use to recommend is the HashiCorp Learn Guides. These are a fantastic walkthrough-based resource that you can go out, use, and it kind of walks you through the process of using Terraform. Now, these guides have kind of been built over the years, so if you've used them in the past and haven't checked them out lately, definitely recommend checking them out because they've been built out and expanded to not only just focus on some of the AWS features, but we've also added things such as Azure, such as GCP, such as even VMware-based walkthrough guides to manage infrastructure. So hopefully, no matter what type of infrastructure you're looking to use, there's going to be a guide that's out there that works for you in the way that you're trying to learn. Because if you're anything like me, the way that I learn is by doing. So if I can tie something that's out there to what I'm trying to accomplish, it just makes everything better and easier to learn. So definitely check out the Learn guides.
Excellent. So you can find those guides if you go to terraform.io. Just go to the tutorial section. And so you can find all of them there. It's pretty complete. So, cool. So this is a question for Kristin. The question is, so the features which were explained will be available in Terraform 0.13, 14, and 15, correct?
Yes, those are releases spread over those versions. So if you're going Terraform 0.13, you're not going to see some of the sensitivity changes I've mentioned because those were over several releases. But yes, those are all features that exist. You can take a look at our change logs. Probably the best way to find out exactly what release was in, what feature was in what release.
Cool. So this is a question for Kyle. Oh, they're just kind of coming in. John asks, during the demo, there was something along the lines of cost estimation. He would just like you to explain what that is.
Yeah, so what was happening within that? That's a feature that's specific to the Terraform Cloud and Terraform Enterprise offerings, which basically goes out and references the individual cloud services APIs for their pricing model. And it kind of brings that back and includes that as part of the Terraform Cloud workflow so that you can kind of see, and have kind of a guesstimate as to what the end cost result is going to be for those resources as they've been written and declared before you actually get over to the apply and provisioning process.
Cool. All right. Jimmy asks a question to Kristin. Can I just use version 1.0 to apply 0.13 to 0.15 code, or do I have to upgrade one version at a time?
Okay, sorry. So basically the same answer before. You definitely still want to step through 0.13 to 0.14, but from 0.14 you should be able to go directly to 1.0 without problem.
Great. Let's see. Lots of questions. Let's see. So this one's for Kyle. Brian asks, will it be possible to use third-party tools at Terraform Cloud or Enterprise, such as TFMask, to solve sensitive data treatment that is not covered by Terraform itself?
So this is kind of a thing that we kind of discussed and kind of previewed at HashiCorp EU. And this is a thing that's known as Terraform Cloud Run Checks. This is something that we're going to be offering as a beta here in the future. Hopefully there's a link that's towards the bottom of that slide whenever that comes up. That basically it's going to allow us to take things such as like cost estimation, how that looked in the demo, as well as Sentinel and the policy as code framework, and kind of integrate third-party solutions and even certain things such as like approvals or email or Slack checks to go out and look for approvals into that Terraform Cloud workflow. So that it's something that's in the process. It's something that we have announced as a preview and something that's going to be available as a beta sometime later this year.
Great. So here's a question from Dwight to Kristin. Does the sensitive variable still get saved to the state file in plain text?
Yes, we've made no changes to state. The best practice is still to use a state storage that can be encrypted at rest. that's not anything that's on our immediate roadmap, but we certainly haven't lost sight of the fact that it is a very frequently requested feature.
Great. Thank you. So this one's for Kyle. Salvador asks, hi, I've already been certified as a Terraform associate. My question is there a next level that we can reach, like a Terraform professional?
Yeah, so right now the Terraform Associate is the only exam that we have available. We are continuing to go down the process of evaluating other certificate levels, and a Terraform Professional is very likely something that could happen. But I don't know any timeframes or any guesstimates as to when that's going to happen. But I do very much appreciate the feedback that is something that folks are looking forward to.
Great. Okay. So this question's for Kristin. Brock asks, is the Azure RM provider ready to handle Terraform 1.0?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Terraform's plugin protocol, so the protocol over which Terraform speaks to the provider binaries, is on a different release cycle. So no provider had to do anything special for Terraform 1.0 release. Anything that was compatible with 0.15 will work with 1.0. So completely unrelated release cycles.
Great. Okay. So another question for Kristin. Where exactly are the provider credentials stored, if not in the variable section? Is it the org level or pulled from an external source dynamically? Did we answer this one already? I think so.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that. Tiger asks, any plan to add the functionality of generating network diagrams based on the network resources?
Terraform can generate a graph of your entire configuration, which is for pretty much every single use case, way too much information and not anything anyone would want to look at. I may be exaggerating there, but I've not seen too many real world use cases for it. So obviously this is not an answer to your question. If you're looking for something though that will look at, say, a specific provider or all of your infrastructure, that may be something the provider itself could apply. Maybe support as a data source. I don't really know. I'm kind of making it up at this point. I don't think that's likely something you're going to see handled by Terraform CLI specifically. And that's likely, like I said, either to be something entirely outside of Terraform or maybe something a provider could do. That could be kind of a cool thing.
Great. Okay. Well, if you guys have further questions, we still have some more, but I think we have quite a bit of time. So feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A section. So Marco has a question of Kyle. He's asking if you can use Terraform in Visual Studio Code.
Yes. So this is actually one of those very exciting things that's kind of evolved over the last couple, maybe year. So one of the things that we've done at HashiCorp is basically taken ownership of the Visual Studio Code extension for Terraform. As well as the Terraform language server that integrates with Visual Studio Code, as well as some of the other text and IDE ISEs that are out there, such as Sublime. We've been creating and providing a lot of updates to that over the years, or over the last year, I should say. We do have a change log that adds a lot of things. Some of the things are just updates to the way that versions are integrating together in between the different Terraform versions. IntelliSense is something that's been huge and been a tremendous addition. Another one of the updates was the way around how the way that Visual Studio Code kind of references the underlying providers. So basically how, like with Terraform, you have to run a Terraform init to actually download and make use of those providers and other modules that you're using within your configuration. And so there's been some tremendous improvements in the way that the extension for VS Code handles that. I can drop a change log in the comments here as a follow-up. But yes, there's been a ton of updates that are happening. As I kind of look through it, they're almost happening on basically a weekly cadence now. So definitely be on the lookout for that. And if you're using Visual Studio Code, definitely grab that extension and be on the lookout for all the updates.
Right on. So let's see. This is for Kristin. How does the state file react when we move from 0.12 to 1.0? Do we need to upgrade it to 0.14 or so before? We've talked about upgrades, but this is specifically about the state file.
Yep, no, this is still the same question, same answers. You've got to go from 12 to 13, 13 to 14. Then you can go from 14 to 1.0, shouldn't be a problem. And I'm sorry, I think I moved questions in the wrong spot.
No, that's okay. Just wanted to talk about the state file specifically. Yeah, lots of questions, guys. Like, let's let me know. Let's see. Jay asks of Kyle. He asked a question about cost estimation. Just going into the details. Does or can cost estimation in Terraform Cloud put out output ranges? For example, an AWS NLB has a base cost, but additional cost based on usage. Can TFC pricing output potential additional costs, or can it only show the base cost?
Yeah, so right now what Terraform Cloud is doing is it's only making use of that base cost. And we also have a list of the resource types, as well as what all cost coverages are available in our docs page. But yeah, it's going to be the base cost is up front.
Great. Okay. So Sushila asks of Kristin, is there a best practices guide or something we can look at when writing modules?
Yeah, I was just looking up the link to our Learn tutorial. So there's a lot of great resources up on that website at this point that cover some module writing best practices. In the chat, I've shared a link to them, but you'll find more on our website if you look around. There's some really, really great content out there that they've written.
Okay. Thank you. This question is from Rakesh for Kyle. Does the recent Terraform version support using interpolations in backend configurations? Example, I would like to build a dynamic backend path and avoid static backend paths for my Terraform components. It's for Kyle.
That one I will have to get back to you on that one. I'm not aware of anything on up front. All of the links to those backends were statically defined. Whether or not that can be handled or managed in a dynamic fashion is something I'll have to follow up with.
Okay. Let's see. Can we download this presentation deck? That's from Pardo.
Yes. So the deck, I'll probably include a link to the GitHub repo where the demo lives, as well as the recording is going to be sent out to everybody who registered for the session. And then the session recording itself is going to be located under the HashiCorp.com/resources area afterwards.
Great. Let's see. So, Satsunder asks, how is the CDK support for Terraform 1.0? Does it exist yet? I guess that would be for Kristin.
The CDK wouldn't have needed to make any changes for 1.0, but it's not a product that I have insight into their roadmap, so I don't know where they are outside of that. But nothing we changed in 1.0 should have impacted them, hence the new features.
Thank you. And if you guys, if everyone wants to check, if you go to the HashiCorp blog, we did just Go support. So if you're using Go and you want to use CDK, a lot of requests for that. So check that out in our blog. Okay. Looks like we have quite a few duplicates. I'm going to ask one more question, and then I think we're going to call it a day here. Drew asks of Kyle, docs seem to suggest that workspaces are used for duplicate sets of resources. Example, QA environment, a production environment. In a demo, you use workspaces to segment different resources for a single project. Is that a recommended paradigm?
One of the nice things about Terraform Cloud and kind of Terraform in general is the way that it allows you to really be able to separate out and segment out the different configurations based on the infrastructures that you're working, where it can be, team focused, it can be, end result, grouping of configurations like that focused. You can do a lot of things in a lot of different ways. One of the things that we've been working on, myself as well as Michelle, are we have some practitioner guides that kind of walk through kind of like what the GitHub side of things would look and how you could manage your configurations, as well as how those would work within the workspaces themselves. And Michelle has created a guide that works along those ways as well, and how it operates against the various Terraform services. So long story short, it depends on what works best for you, because a lot of those areas, it's going to be supported. It's just making sure that you set up the role-based access control to support that, making sure that you add and properly tag everything or name everything in a standard way that really kind of helps streamline the process of how it's managed.
Great. Yeah, lots of insights on workspaces in our documentation. They handle a lot in Terraform Cloud. The more familiar you are with workspaces, I think the more you can actually leverage some of the benefits of Terraform Cloud. So yeah, check that out, get familiar. So, all right, everyone, great questions, great session. Thanks so much to Pals. Thanks so much to Kristin. Just a reminder, this is being recorded. We will make this available soon. Anyway, if you haven't already, download Terraform 1.0 and check it out. And if you have questions, we definitely have folks in our community who are there to answer questions, et cetera. So thanks so much for attending, and we hope you have a great day.